Mark, you reported a few weeks ago that even internally, Apple has been restructuring to better serve that market in India. What's the latest there?
Yeah, India is all the hype for Apple right now, really outside of these two retail stores, right? These retail stores probably not going to move the needle for Apple as a company revenue-wise, even in India itself. Most Apple products in India and elsewhere, of course, are going to be bought by consumers at third-party retail stores or online or carrier partners, right? But this shows Apple's dedication to the area. These stores are not small investments. You have to hire, 100 people plus per store. You have to do inventory. They're setting up the Genius Bar and classes in India for the first time. And internally this year, they're restructuring their sales organization. So the head of India sales, right, what's known as their managing director or country manager for India, is now going to report directly to Apple's head of sales globally, right? That's going to be a first. Previously, you had a vice president in between who oversaw India as well as other emerging markets like Eastern Europe and Africa. So that layer has been removed, sort of elevating the importance of India within the company's operations itself.
There's a lot of data when it comes to Apple flying out of India right now. The latest reporting from Bloomberg is from a sales perspective, $6 billion for the 12-month period through March. That's just one side of the story. The other is supply chain and manufacturing, right? And I think the latest reporting from Bloomberg is the dollar value of exports or iPhones constructed in that nation hit a new milestone as well. What is the strategy for Apple in having a supply chain base in that nation?
Yeah, the strategy for Apple to have a supply chain base in India is twofold. One, you really need to manufacture devices that you're selling in India itself to save on some of those import taxes, right, which are incredibly high as they are in Brazil, another place where Apple has set up shop to produce iPhones. So that's one part of it. The bigger component is diversification, right? Until now, Apple had mostly produced all of its devices in China. But over the last 4 to 5 years or so, you've seen issues related to tariffs. You've seen the potential trade war between the U.S. and China. You've seen these COVID-0 policies in China. You've seen the impact of the virus in China on Apple's production. So you've seen delay after delay to key products. The MacBook Air last year, the iPhone 14 Pro. This was just at the end of 2022, right? 2 years plus into COVID. And you saw major shutdowns at Foxconn that prevented Apple from selling as many iPhone 14 Pros as possible. So you really need to diversify to try to avoid problems like that. And that's what you're seeing Apple lay the groundwork for in India primarily, but also in places like Vietnam and Malaysia and Brazil as well, plus a little bit of Ireland.
So that's the India story. Let's go a bit more global. We asked our audience, if you're going to buy an Apple product, where do you do it? In store, online, or as you were explaining, from a third party, right, other retailers? 55% of respondents online is where they're buying. What is store strategy broadly for Apple? What is the future of the Apple Store with its shiny glass windows?
I think the poll is a little skewed, right? It was a Twitter poll, and perhaps our audience on Twitter, they're people who, want to go to an Apple store to buy an iPhone, or they live near Apple stores. But the actual truth is that the vast majority of iPhones, at least, they're actually purchased through third-party retailers and carriers, right? Whether that's your Verizon store in the US or your O2 store in the UK, or in Best Buy or Target or elsewhere in the US, or Carphone Warehouse in Europe, right? And so Apple really wants a lot more of those sales to flow through its own retail stores, right? And we've seen a slowdown in expansion for retail stores over the last 3 to 4 years or so, primarily due to COVID. Another reason is they have so many at this point. But what you're seeing is they're pushing more stores now in that Asia area, right? You have India. They've opened more stores in Korea recently. And then they have stores coming in Malaysia as well. So clearly their expansion is Asia related at this point.